Okay, so thank you for being here, audience. Thank you so much for organizing us, all of us. So I have been assigned to talk about corporate governance, and I'm trying to see Igor, corporate governance and CSR in the global context, and some ideas for future research. I'm going to kind of have to be here because of the clicker. Okay. All right. So, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm not going to talk so much about CSR. I'm just going to translate it like or fast forward to ESG or sustainability, which is like the new term of this century. So this is kind of like the first paper that could be written, how everything has evolved in terms of the terminology, like from mission to CSR to. I'm gonna watch the time to Jakob. So like it should be like 15, no more than 15 minutes. So basically the idea here is that it is no longer whether or how or why we're doing it, but it's more like for companies and for corporate governance, for boards, for owners, for managers, like how you're going to do it. Okay. So just to put you a little bit in the kind of like in the mood for it, like there are basically two main emergencies, and maybe we could add here the digital as well, like the digital challenges, the digital bridges. But the climate emergency, that's what you're going to talk next. So I'm just and also intellectual property, which is what Eduardo is going to talk about. So two main crises: climate change, health emergency, digital. And so, we're just kind of going from COVID to recession to climate change to biodiversity, like he's my #1 audience. All right, so the World Economic Forum, it has this global risk landscape, and I think this would apply also to all of us, the 4 panelists here, in terms of corporate governance. But basically, it's a little bit hard to see, but the one in the very top in red, it says infectious disease, the one next to it, climate change, like the green one. And it's kind of interesting because a year ago, they put the COVID there. So they put the COVID here, like when they did this thing, the World Economic Forum, and now it has moved there. The green are environmental. So just kind of, I think it's very important, like when boards, one of the main things that boards do is to assess the risk of the companies, and managers, they assess the risk and they look at all sorts of risk. So this is one report that boards actually looked at sometimes. This is the same, but just put like this. So basically what we have here is that it seems like for a long time, we have had this myopic view on, when managers make decisions, shareholders, so are we having this myopic view of where our company and the world should be going? What is basically the questions that when we talk about corporate governance and the decision makers, like the boards, the owners, the managers, some of the questions is, what is the true cost of doing it now, short term, versus doing it later, and these decisions between short term and long term being the sum of a lot of short terms. And to think about all these decisions in terms of cost and opportunities, like it's a cost, it's an opportunity. And this is very much related to some of the things, right? Like, so whether we talk about sustainability, ESG, is like, if this is a disruption in the market, it could be a cost, but it could also be a great opportunity in terms of ways to innovate. Whether you're doing, you're thinking about Tesla, you're thinking about Beyond Meat, and now like the burgers of the world, they have to provide non-meat hamburgers. So it's like innovation, disrupting. So this is kind of a new, like boards. So I'm kind of here giving the setting a little bit, what might be, what might be cheap now, not to do something, like not to, do like, cardboard packaging might be very costly later. And it's a matter of this, opportunity, but Paul Pullman has written this book about, being a courageous industry leader, but then we have Danone that maybe he was courageous, but he didn't engage the stakeholders. So it's like a complex scenario. All right, so because I'm the first one in the panel, I thought I would just kind of just kind of throw you a few things, like, like a few evidence of where we are and what boards are thinking, what owners are thinking, investors, etc. So when you ask boards, and this is from Deloitte 2021, from your perspective as the corporate secretary or the corporate governance professional, what top 3 emerging or trending issues do you think your board will want to focus on 2021 beyond, strategy, risk, and executive compensation, which are things that they have their own committees for that. So basically, the number one is for 2021, even in the middle of the diversity, number one was this very key thing, which is board diversity, workforce, equity, inclusion, these kind of things. And actually, I just very recently came across this next slide that I had never seen before, but maybe some of you had seen. And it's a slide from 2018. And I'm going to show it to you. And it's basically that in 2018, there were as many women CEOs. I mean, I don't know if you had seen this slide. Oh. In 2000, I thought it was super interesting. Are you there? Are you Igor?
Yes.
You probably, Igor, had seen it, but in 2018, women CEOs, as CEOs named John, okay, in the Fortune 500. It's unbelievable. So this is the women CEOs, and these are the, I don't know if it's in the SP, I haven't read it. SP, no, the Fortune 500, yeah. So this is the New York Times. So, I mean, this tells you a lot about diversity. So within the, corporate governance and CSR ESG, an important thing has been the D&I, like the diversity and inclusion. And it seems like now the D, like the diversity, like most companies have been able to include more women, like especially in boards. So that has been either because of the quotas or because of social pressure, that has been taken care. But now the problem is the I. What do you do with those diversity in your board? How do you really integrate? So they have been invited to the dance. People say they have been invited to the dance, but they're not dancing. They're not dancing with the rest of the people. So in terms of the US, which is basically what we have is that there are women. So the women are on boards, and now the big challenge is to have women of color in boards, like to have these dual, so there are very few women of color in the boards in the US. So this is kind of something. So here, 140. So this is like now there is, especially after the Floyds and the Black Lives Matters, like this kind of social turmoil in the US, which has spread to other countries. Many boards started to add new African-American directors and women African-Americans. So this is like the diversity is like in the new, and from my point of view, and we can talk about this later if you like, it's not so much, whether you have like an African-American or a female, because there was like an excellent board in the US. There's an excellent board that if you look at the picture, there's like an African-American, an Asian woman, like let's say, like maybe somebody from the LGBT community, but they have all gone to Princeton. Okay, so yeah, they had all gone undergrad to Princeton, and have done all a JD at Harvard or Yale. So basically, there's no cognitive diversity. It doesn't matter if they're gay, they're woman, they're African American. They all have been exposed to the same kind of ideology. So I think what we need to think is beyond this more demographic, but also like emphasize the cognitive diversity, which is what might enrich this decision making in the board and in the teams. All right, so so another question. So this is back to this question: what is important? So the other part. So within the CSR ESG, the other part that it's important is this green part, right? Like the green in terms of climate change, sustainability, etc. So if you ask boards, this is this next slide. So I'm just going to throw you a bunch of interesting things that I think they're interesting. So if you ask board, how, do you agree that ESG is important? It's like, so the response is usually, yes, ESG is important because it's related to strategy, it's related to earnings risk management, and it's related to company performance. And then if you ask the following question is like, how prepared is your board? How prepared are you for, to assess environmental risk, to like really prepare yourself for all sorts of sustainability? basically 25% of the directors say that they have a strong grasp, which means 75% of boards don't have any training or anybody in the board that knows how to do it. So, nowadays, like we are all business schools here, there's a great opportunity to train boards, which usually are economists or lawyers, to be educated, to be able to make decisions about ESG. So on the other hand, if you ask shareholders, so now I'm looking from the shareholder point of view, if you ask shareholders, what topics do shareholders want to discuss with the directors, 43% of the time ESG comes up. Like they want to discuss, okay, what is your environmental risk, your climate risk, etc. So that's like very much in the agenda. And of course, so here I'm trying to relate the CSR ESG with the corporate governance. That's a discussion that is now in the table. And that you can no longer like put in the board agenda, put it at the very end of the day, squeeze in that you never get to. It has to be like properly addressed. So the other topics are, compensation, oversight, and composition. Just, most of the time, this ESG, CSR ESG is handled by female directors. And, there's a lot of research showing that female directors have a bit more sensitivity, or female managers have better sensitivity to CSR ESG issues. So this is kind of cognitive psychology research. All right, I'm mindful of the time. Investors are also, investors are increasingly pressuring companies to be, to really face ESG, CSR, like to actually, so here are the top 3 asset managers. And you can see that every year more, they're voting against some of the proposals. If they're not detailed enough, like they are there on your face. So that's something that is going to become very important and very interesting, I think, to follow research-wise. I'm just showing you like more kind of, entertaining things, but any of these could be studied, like, from an academic point of view, like to really what's behind these, right? So another, and here I have only 3 more slides. So another one that I thought it was really interesting is the top ESG issues considered by asset managers, right? So what they care about is issues of executive pay, obviously now climate change. This is from 2021. And I thought, after the COVID, what really surfaced, whereas, like ESG, we have the E, which is environmental, which there has been a lot of progress, particularly in Europe, in measuring it because it's more scientifically graspable, it can be grasped. But now after the COVID, what has really surfaced is the S for social, in terms of, digital inequality or breaches, mental health, health in general, etc. So the S in the ESG is what, I think is the new thing. All right, so 2 more slides that they are more detailed. So things that are happening in the CSR that are going to affect corporate governance is this debate between the voluntary and the mandatory. The European Union, the European Commission is about to throw a tsunami of regulation on E and the S, and all the practitioners are just doing like this, Igor, like waiting, because they're going to make a lot of money and consulting, all the auditing and all the lawyers that they're going to sue and all the people who are going to, so this is like a huge thing, like a huge tsunami, because a lot of it is mandatory. In the US also, with the SEC is also preparing much stringent non-financial regulation. So this is financial and non-financial, right? Taxonomies. So we have, here's the next slide. Like there are a lot of, this is called the alphabet soup. There are so many taxonomies that companies, they don't even know where to start. So this is another opportunity, like for consultants to, just, advise companies, but boards and managers need to know, it's like, what do we want to do? Like what, which taxonomy are we going to use? What is required? Do we want to be do you want to be like preventive? Do we want to be more on the fringe, like cutting edge, etc.? Transparency and disclosure, and the risk of misdisclosure with greenwashing. I mean, there are a lot of topics here. And then ESG becoming mainstream, so mainstream that like these green bonds are, anything is a green bond now, so it needs to be regulated as well. So very last slide. So these are some, what I consider some hot topics. So here I think I have 6 bullet points. The first one is that there is clearly, with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, there's a paradigm shift, which is a great opportunity, like for innovation, for disruption, and it needs to be led at the top from the owners, from the boards. So that's that's something to follow. I am very interested in the idea of new owners, of shareholder activism. So here is a huge range of things that actually I'm working on some of these. Hedge funds, engine number 1 with Exxon, playing shareholders or stakeholders with the Danone, and how Farber was kicked out, and the board also. Responsible investors, going from the Sisters of St. Francis of Philadelphia, being activists, to other owners, NGOs, hybrid organizations, etc. Then there are new things like Say on Climate, like the Say on Pay, now Say on Climate. And then I think the other big topic is the stakeholder rights, because there's not enough on a stakeholder theory and thinking about the stakeholder rights. Like Sophie Back and I just wrote something for the Journal of Management Studies, but thinking about all these trade-offs as well. So we are at AVA. The national institutional context is very important, and we have a paper here with colleagues at Carlos Tercero about that, like how it affects how you define ESG, so this kind of cross-national and how these interactions. And then finally, 2 final points that I think are important, interesting to study is integrating the E, the S, and the G. And what is the alignment, misalignment, and then finally, in my last split second, the unintended consequences of ESG and corporate governance and the greenwashing. So these are some big topics that I think within the space of ESG and corporate governance are going to be important. And we have here innovation and all these transversal topics, including like the digital, of course. So thank you very much. Thank you. All right, so let's open the next one.
If there are any pressing questions regarding the presentation right now, we can do this right now. Alternatively, I would suggest we move to the next presentation and leave the discussion for later.
Yeah, we can bring everything together.
Yes. So thank you, Ruth.
So I'm trying to find.
Eduardo is next.
So Eduardo, you have it here or?
No, it's here.
Okay.
I don't know. But there's so many.
I didn't put anybody to sleep. Yeah. Now you can criticize.
Encuentro el ratón.
No,
ahí. Ah, claro. Bueno, también está aquí. ¿Le puedo marcar la escritorio?
O si creo que si la abres directamente.
La abro directamente, vale.
La puedes compartir.
Julio, lo dejo aquí.
Ok.
No, aquí está primero el otro. No, vale. Sí. Okay, so I think that Ruth gave a broad overview on the top pressing topics on corporate governance and corporate social responsibility, ESG. Now it's kind of changing the names, but no, it's a kind of a very broad topic. I'm going to talk about something a bit more specific. I think it's quite specific. This is basically the role of corporate governance on innovation, and not just on innovation, but on the specific actions in global markets for technology, and in global markets for technology. So what I would like to do now is to talk a bit about, just very briefly, about markets for technology. Okay, about how corporate governance interacts with markets for technology, the actions in markets for technology, why this is important, why there can be a role for boards and in general corporate governance quality to have a role on markets for technology, and why particularly it's more important in global markets for technology. Okay, that's a bit of the idea. So for some of you, this can be already kind of obvious, but some of you can come as a surprise that markets for technology, basically, they go into the market to see if there is some technology that can be incorporated to your company and actually make the transaction. It's something that has been studied quite a lot during the last 20 years. And usually the conclusions or basically the view of it is that for the most part, it's something socially desirable because it allows to relocate technologies to whoever can use it well. It allows companies to decide where it is better, because you have the option there to import some technology or develop your own technology or a combination of the two. So having good market for technology is supposed to be good for everyone because it allows efficient allocation of decisions. Also, it's kind of going to help avoid litigation. Okay, if you just get your intellectual property, portfolio well designed, but with some additions from some other companies, it's going to make it easier to get a good agreement on that. And also, it's good in general for the diffusion of knowledge. So in principle, it's a market that should be kind of functional market in terms of technology, would allow us to implement, develop innovations, and also develop innovations into real products, and also progress more with innovations. But there is a problem, or there are many problems. Okay, in markets for technology, there are many problems. So all the problems that you have, all the frictions that you usually have in markets for any other type of product, they are usually multiplied when you are talking about technology. Okay, first of all, there's when we think about transaction costs, there is the problem of asymmetric information in the sense that we don't know exactly what exactly is going to contribute for us either technically or commercial given product. So we don't know if it will be worth to transact it and pay X, Y, Z for that. Okay. In fact, this thing of asymmetric information has been the typical answer or a typical reason why researchers, scholars think that technology-driven mergers and acquisitions take place instead of saying, oh, I would like to have this and that technology, because you don't know what exactly the technology that is going to be valuable, that is making this company work, and will allow you to do even better. What you do is, instead of trying to get a license in this or that technology, or buy this or that patent, you just buy the full pack, and then you pull everything together, you get everything together, and then you will find out later what is useful for your company. Okay. The second thing is that the transfer of technology is not just I can give you this product and that's it. Okay. But usually you need to have the collaboration of inventors or implementers in a company. So basically, the transfer of the R&D is not that I transfer a patent. I will have to hire services for implementing that knowledge. So the transfer of knowledge is knowledge is sticky. It's sticky. It is embedded in the human capital. And then, if you have done a transaction, then there may be a problem of hold up, because then later on you will need to have these services, to be able to implement it, and this creates a lot of uncertainty. And then there is a third friction, which doesn't have to do so much with the transaction, but with the organizational dynamics and attitude inside. Okay, which is the potentials for internal opposition. Okay, and there is a clear or very well documented phenomenon, which is called the not invented here syndrome, that makes that usually insiders, they don't like that much that you get technology from the outside. They always have their own internal option, that it's the way we have done it before here, and it's our internal option, that they tend to go to favor. Okay, so there's a kind of internal resistance. Okay, and this internal resistance is something that managers will have to face, will have to fight, and it involves some costs. Okay, so this is basically why there is not so much action in markets for technology as there should be. Okay, but when we have market frictions, we can also say that, or market failures, some people say them as business opportunities. So this means that there is room, right, to improve, if there's room to, by easing those transactions, by making things that could improve those transactions, okay, there could be some opportunities, some potential opportunities that can be seized by companies. Okay, and here is where I think there is some room to understand, to think, how corporate governance could contribute to eliminate those frictions. Okay, one possibility, if you think about the broadly about the functions of corporate governance, we have one side the oversight, the monitoring function, and on the monitoring function it pops up that managers are supposed to be shareholder value creation by the board should kind of incentivize, give some kind of motivation to managers to make the right decisions. And make the right decisions sometimes involve facing some personal costs in terms of confronting their own people in the organizations. There are R&D managers, there are star inventors, etc. Okay, by bringing in technology from the outside. Okay, so the monitoring function can provide, can play a role. The corporate governance, okay, can play a role in forcing somehow or putting a big incentives, design a good incentive system, or basically, or they actually monitor the managers that they are doing good in looking for right technologies, even scanning the market for the right technologies to import, and also being able to fight internal opposition whenever it is needed, which is something different to us. Okay. Good corporate governance could also contribute there in terms of the strategic function, right? They bring resources. So basically, if you think about interlock boards that have contacts, people who have contacts in many different companies, then this could bring an idea of how to avoid this asymmetric information problem, right? In a sense, could help to ease the problem of asymmetric information and understand well what is working in these other companies and how can be implemented here. Okay. So there is also identification of external technological opportunities, and particularly when you have good knowledge of the environment or the business environment, you are supposed to be also going to be give some help, in strategic terms to the company. Now, this interacts. Why this is particularly important in the context of global markets for technology? Well, the point with global markets for technology is that they are quite underdeveloped. So when we talk about having like market frictions and a business opportunity, now internal global transactions, they are subject to much more important market frictions, and therefore there are more rooms for opportunities. Okay, so here is a share of the amount of annual traded patents. Okay. In the US, you can see this in the graph, and you see that most of them, the great majority of them, are patents who have a US priority, meaning that they are filed initially in the US. This is a proxy for whether it is filed by inventors in the US or by companies in the US. And the small cell at the top is those who are non-US priority, those who are filed from the outside. Okay, so basically around 70% of the traded patents are actually from the US. And then you look further into the research that has been done in this, is that companies are much more likely to buy to their neighbors, to other companies that work around them, because basically you have to talk to them, you have to visit them, they have to transfer your knowledge, so and then you have to identify them, and so there is some kind of effect of geography that leaves a lot of potential technology to be bought that it's never really taken advantage. You can think this is only from the US because at the end of the day, US is a very big market. It's a very big technological hub. So basically, it's just normal that 70% of the traded patents in the US are from other US companies. But if you look at Germany, you have exactly the same. So you would expect that Germany is a smaller country. They would not the ones that they buy. It would be a smaller proportion, but still you are in the 60-70%. So by 70% of the traded patents in Germany are from one German bought by German companies are to another German company, and the same thing happens in Japan. So even the smaller markets are kind of fraction. These markets are kind of very fraction. Okay, and foreign origin patent in general has between 18-20% lower probability of being traded in the US than national in one again, because it is kind of if there is a kind of underdevelopment of markets of technology, if companies are not looking for technology outside of the borders, it's even more important the problem outside, or the phenomenon is even more important outside of the country borders. Okay, so yeah, friction basically particularly acute for cross-border transactions. And then so we can ask ourselves, how, if we think that bigger frictions imply a bigger opportunities, in the sense that there are still even more opportunities for technology to be seized outside the borders of the company. No, we could also think again, how can good corporate governance contribute to better decision making here? And one, again, perhaps less important, in this case, I think the less important dimension is the monitoring function. One could think that not invented here syndrome is going to be even stronger against non-national technologies, okay? But this is something that could be contended. The other part is strategic function in terms of international experience, knowledge of foreign markets, okay? Knowledge of not only foreign markets, but knowledge of foreign input markets, okay? And then therefore they allow for identification of external technological opportunities. So basically, questions that, or a tentative list of practical implications that could be useful for research would be precisely, on this direction. No, international diversity of board of directors. Okay, I think that Ruth was now mentioning the number of CEOs called John and the number of women in the board, also the number of Black Americans in all. But I would like to know the number of this figure for the number of Indians, because right now you look in the news now, it's like the upcoming of the Indian CEO. Now we have Twitter, we have Microsoft, we have Alphabet. I mean, almost every single big IT company, not big, huge, giant IT company, are having Indian CEOs. Okay, and then we can think that just like Indian CEOs, yeah, there are many reasons for that. I'm not saying that it's because they know well, foreign markets, because actually, to be honest, all these CEOs have done most of their careers in the US. Okay, but what I'm saying is, apart from other reasons, one of the reasons is that some of us a more international background is going to be more aware of potential opportunities for technology that you have if you have been developing all your life in the US with the same network of colleagues, from Ivy League, education, and all the friends in the Ivy League network. This is not going to be something that's much more my intuition, but I have that really something I can just show you that it's not something that's going to be make them very open to global transactions of technology. Also, part of the monitoring role of the boards, it's kind of actively monitoring for the technological opportunities. It may be not in a very, very specific and detailed, obviously, manner. Okay, but there is part of one of the checkpoints of the job to do. Okay, also the combination of long-term and short-term incentives may play an important role here. Okay, because sometimes we talk about the giving long-term incentives, and then we manage to understand the compensation package that is designed for managers have a long-term view. Okay, and this may clearly affect to the choice of introducing technologies from the outside, or just rely on our incrementally improving our own technologies. Okay. And then, yeah, again, the evaluation of cross-border M&As, there's something where it's kind of the important decisions that in where board of directors have a say. Okay, as I said, many of the times, technology-driven medicine acquisitions are meant to take advantage of some opportunity to incorporate some technology. And in principle, given that the numbers that we see about the lack of trading with external, let's say, cross-border of non-national partners, one would say that cross-border M&As that are technologically driven, a priori, would deserve special attention. Would shouldn't be just say, oh no, this is just going to be a failure. This is just a company trying to increase their, all the reasons that we sometimes give for rejecting M&As, particularly technology M&As. No, when we don't think about acquiring external knowledge, if we think that cross-border there are some opportunities that are still not being taken as shown by the fact that there is so little cross-border transactions, not so little, but relatively little cross-border transactions, one would expect that cross-border MMAs could be seen with more attention, let's say, and those are some of my implications. These are things that actually is a tentative list of how questions that would be interesting to ask oneself on how corporate governance may have an impact on cross-border technology transfer. But what is clear is that there is kind of opportunities for companies, and they are going to, those who are able to seize them, to catch them, they are going to be apparently, oh, this is what the numbers seem to say. It's not an easy job, obviously. If we don't have them doing it, it's because there are some kind of frictions, but overcoming these frictions can provide these opportunities, and that's where perhaps we think that corporate governance will have an impact. And okay, that's it. I think so far.
Any pressing comments right now? Shall we wait for the open Q&A?
Yeah, I just want to say while fully prepares for presentation. There, I want to say that the statistics I presented were even a lower bound estimate, because not everyone applies in the US patent office. So these are patents have prior somewhere else, prior filing somewhere else, that have been applied with intention perhaps of being traded or being used in the US. So even those are have much lower probability of being traded. So these were even lower estimates. Yeah, I mean, conservative.
Where's the, where are you? Oh, here. Oh, no. Oh, here. I should do this. I teach every day with this stuff. No? Did I screw it up? Don't do that. So I thank you. And I actually want to start with a story. And it's a story that is very close to me because it's about my wife. So my wife changed jobs 6 months ago. And this is the first startup that she's worked for. The company is called Iron Hack, and they do a boot camp for digital technology. Basically, what they do is people that want to be trained into the technology world, where the new jobs are, 95% of their students get jobs within a month of graduation, right? And so she's the chief recruiter, and her job is to double the company from 150 to 300 employees in 3 years. They have 30 million in round C funding, and they're kind of looking very well. They have operations in 12 countries around the world, 12 cities around the world, in which they start at the same time. Her boss, my wife's boss, is based in Miami, the head of HR. The head of marketing is based on Germany. And yesterday I walked into her office at home. She works from home. And she said, and I asked, what are you doing? And she said, I'm at the Christmas party. And so a Zoom Christmas party, 2 hours with all the people in the company. Okay, and what the reason why I want to talk about that today is because think about the issues of corporate governance that an organization like that brings to play. But it's not only that. It's a COVID, among many other effects, is accelerating the spread and growth of what we call born global firms, right? In the context for a number of firms, it's imperative to compete globally immediately. Before, the issue of competing globally was kind of an option for firms, but now not competing globally in models that require global scalability, risk to the success of the venture, and other firms and copycats occupying the space. And we see that all the time. In those areas, for example, where Uber was slow to enter, they have very strong local competitors. In fact, some of the local competitors from Spain, which is Cabify, actually competes very strongly against Uber in Latin America. Okay, and so these effects are notable in markets such as food delivery, transportation, mobility, gaming, and technology, but not restricted to this. My son, who's 12, it's playing he's choosing between Fortnite and FIFA 21 and playing with kids. And sometimes I ask him, where's, I don't know, he's somewhere in Asia. And that is part of the game, right? So there's a race going on for companies to occupy these global spaces very fast. The big difference here is that the inability to occupy those spaces puts the company at risk. What I call born global with a vengeance. If you are not occupying those space in this global environment, then somebody else, a copycat or local firm, is going to occupy this space. Okay. Also, there are some other forces that are accelerating the process. For example, global forces of financing, local and global VC firms investing in these ventures. One of the things that are kind of the globalization of retirement systems has created is a slush of money that needs to be invested every month, right? And these people are looking for places to put the money everywhere around the world. Actually, education and business schools are also contributing to this. And I have an example of one of my former students. I'm going to mention him because he's going to be speaking at our graduation ceremony on Friday. Philip Pauser was my MBA student. He started a company called Thermondo, which does digital heating system and disruptions in that area. And one of the things that's kind of interesting is not only he started this company, but a lot of the global managers of this company are his MBA classmates that were participating with him. Okay, now this phenomena requires rethinking of corporate governance models in two particular issues. Okay, number one, number one, decisions of managing a fast-growing global workforce with different speeds of growth and different markets. So we're going to talk a little more about this, and decisions about, and this is one of the key things for overseeing the strategy and business model of the firm, and the idea about centralization or decentralization of the firm, of the business model in different markets. So you keep it intact, or how much is it acceptable to adjust the model in each country, and what are the implications of those adjustments for corporate governance? Because now you don't have a completely unique firm, you have different firms. More on this in a second, right? So COVID has accelerated this process immensely. Why? Because it has created new opportunities in new countries and markets, created the opportunity to extend the business model to other areas and markets, which also means issues of corporate governance. For example, to delivery, from mobility to delivery, which is easy if you want to see, but it also means different differences in terms of the business model, different interactions with stakeholders, etc., that actually affect it. And increasingly demanding demand for existing services and new ways. So I was actually at a restaurant the other day, and I was waiting for me to be seated, and three, how do you call it, global whatever people were waiting there for food. And so I asked the lady, what's the balance? And this is like the regular restaurant. It was a pizza place, very good, but it's your regular one shop pizza place, etc. 50% of their business is now delivered, right? And so I started to talk about her in terms of how do you manage delivery with the inside customers, because if I have to wait sitting there because you're giving my food to delivery people, I'm not going to be a happy camper. So we spent some time talking about these things, right? So what are issues that not only create new issues of governance, but also puts pressure on traditional government methods and approaches? A few things, okay? Number one, manages issues of control in the context of scalability and business model adjustment, what I said before, okay? We have to be big. If we're not big, not big, broad, right? If I'm not broad, somebody's going to occupy my space. But at the same time, I have to make sure that my model adjusts to this particular part of the world. And if I adjust it, how do I control for that? Adjustments for different geographical market contexts with unique characteristics. For example, one of the things that's happening in Latin America with a lot of these models is that a lot of these new models were developed in developed countries where credit card usage is very broad. You go to Colombia, which has one of the fastest growing delivery companies in the world right now, Rappi. And one of the things that they did is that they design a system in which people can actually interact with them without credit cards. And also with issues, for example, of directions in emerging markets that are not so clear than in other places. And they're growing, they're taking over all of Latin America. And by the way, once you do that, it's easy to transition into more developed countries, because basically you solve the complicated problem, the easier problem is easy, right? Issue of class segmentation business models, right? So traditionally these models in developed countries target the middle class. What happens when you have emerging markets in which different segments of the population are going? How do you adjust the business model? How do you control for that adjust becomes issue, right? And actually the two key ones in terms of corporate governance, the issue of managing a global workforce in the context of individual country labor regulations. The most simple one: who is an employee? Okay, not so simple as before, right? And different countries, you have different issues of defining that is. How should incentives and allocation and compensation be allocated? Firm-based, country-based. Good. I am in Spain, but you are in the Dominican Republic. We have the same position, same company. We meet through Zoom, and it turns out that you make 50,000 a year more than I do. Okay, doing the same thing for the company and with similar results in terms of. And by the way, in the old world, this is easy to kind of keep separated. Not so much in the Zoom related environment in which everybody is the same. Okay, and finally, the issue of legal organization and governance, right? How do you organize these global firms? A global organization, local organizations per each of the countries, a local organization depending on regions, markets, etc. Even from a legal standpoint and from a board standpoint, these things have significant implications, right? And in particular, because you have different systems, different legal requirements, different tax systems that also make more complicated the issues of corporate governance in this environment. Okay, and I'm going to cut it because I know that we're not doing so well on time, so that we can have some time for discussion afterwards. Thank you. What? How did I kill him? Did I kill Igor? How did I kill Igor? He's here. He's here. He's alive.
He never goes to bed.
Oh, I have to make him bigger. ¿Cómo lo hago?
And not asleep.
Oh, let me quit. Wait a second. Let me quit. Oh, there he is.
Thank you, Julio. From innovation to entrepreneurship.
Right.
And
Can you
now over to Igor.
hear me, guys?
Yes.
Okay. Well, hello, good afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person due to crazy travel restrictions, which the UK government is introducing. But I'm with you in spirit, of course. Like other panelists, I prepared a short presentation on 35 slides, but I'm not going to make it. I will just, for the sake of leaving time for discussion, I will cut it short and do a verbal presentation. But if you are interested in further details, I could share slides with you afterwards. So my interests are on interface of corporate governance and technology. And as we all know, our understanding of corporate governance has evolved recently. We moved away from a simplistic economics and finance grounded view on governance as a monitoring mechanism, as what shareholders should put in place to reduce or monitor managerial discretion. Then more recent research grounded in strategy and management perspective came up with a strategy and resource roles of corporate governance. For example, corporate boards are there not only to monitor, but also to provide strategic advice. Most recent perspectives emphasize legitimacy roles of corporate governance, and research by Ruth Aguilera, Gregory Jackson, Ryan Krause clearly indicate that corporate governance is not just a monitoring and strategy mechanism. It's actually a way to legitimize business vis-a-vis broader groups of stakeholders, and Ruth outlined quite eloquently what these roles are about. And the question is, what is the impact on this complexity of corporate governance roles and functions vis-a-vis the rapid development of technologies, and specifically digital technologies? And we see first studies emphasizing positive effects of technological innovations in terms of the effectiveness and efficiency of legacy governance models, which most of the companies, of course, still pursue. There is some evidence that companies increasingly using AI systems in their monitoring processes. My personal favorite case study is a company which produces artificial intelligence systems to monitor behavior of brokers and the equity traders in the brokerage houses. And the system is learning on individual trading patterns. And if somebody makes decisions outside their kind of historical trading pattern, the alarm bells ring, and the supervisors could question or look in a particular transactions to see if everything is watertight. The compliance is increasingly managed by artificial intelligence systems. JP Morgan, for example, when we interviewed some of the top executives, indicated that loan applications are actually reviewed not by individuals, but actually the machines. Big data analytics is used by big accounting companies when they perform audit services, and in particular checking inventories in large multinational companies. The entrepreneurial finance is changing very rapidly. Many entrepreneurial firms are raising capital not through IPOs, initial public offerings, but through ICOs, initial coin offerings, using blockchain technologies to reach out to investors and potential shareholders, which is not really shareholders. They don't have residual rights on cash flow. They have residual rights on service provided by a particular entrepreneurial company. So obviously there are lots of positives, but the technology researchers and some corporate governance experts started pointing out potential problems which are associated with integrating governance processes with digital technologies. Let's think about monitoring. What is actually monitored when the organizations are blurring their boundaries and perform within their own ecosystems? Think about Amazon. What is actually Amazon as a company? What should be monitored by the board of directors in terms of compliance, operations, strategies? That becomes quite an ambiguous issue. Strategy service of corporate governance is clearly becoming more complex because companies are crossing the boundaries of their industries. Think about fintech, for example, agri-tech, green finance. These operations involve crossing the boundaries from finance into technology, from agriculture into technological domains. So clearly, to provide a strategic guidance and advice, board members should have a clear understanding of what actually going on, not only in a specific industry where the local company operates, but across different domains. And our research looking at the S&P 500 companies and the board digital skills across many industries and many sectors clearly show that there is no actually new type of board members who could comply, who could actually have expertise across industry domains. And finally, legitimacy role of corporate governance. And Ruth talked a lot about this function, also in slightly different context. The problem is that digital technologies are making very ambiguous the notion of market failure, and that's where the regulation actually is stepping in. Think about Julio mentioned companies operating in the gig economy domain, the Deliveroo, Just Eat, and so forth. Uber, of course, and many other similar companies. This sector is growing very rapidly, but the regulator is quite concerned with regard to operations and the foundations of the gig economy. And as you know, the European Commission recently introduced a new rule that participants in the gig economy are not self-employed, they're actually employees. And that creates a huge headache for governance structures of companies who operate in this domain, because clearly they will be exposed to all sorts of stakeholder criticism if they are not following these new rules. There is a talk about Uber practicing a form of modern slavery with regard to its companies involved or employees involved in its services. So to cut a long story short, what kind of new research questions this interface between corporate governance and technologies creates? Well, first of all, the fundamental question is agency framework valid in the context of blurred organizational boundaries, in the context of organizational ecosystems, when we don't really have a clear understanding what are the company's assets, who are the owners of these assets, and what is the nature of a principal agency conflict in a context of pretty much virtual organizations. The second important question is with regard to the functioning of corporate boards. For the moment, most of the companies, and even in the new economy, use what is called a legacy model of board organization and corporate governance. But is this model actually fit for purpose and could buffer challenges produced by technological changes? And more interestingly, from my personal research perspective, is the issue of we talk a lot about open source innovation when we have a focal company and a lot of connectivity to participants in innovation, which are not members of the company itself. Think about Apple Store, again, Amazon, and many other similar companies. Can we talk about a model of open source governance when stakeholders have an enhanced recognition in the process of decision making? Obviously, companies will be very resistant to the whole idea of bringing outsiders right in the heart of the process of decision making. But research, including my own, clearly shows that if this recognition is not provided in some meaningful shape or form, there could be very significant material negative implications for strategy and legitimacy roles of corporate governance. I think I will stop now. It's basically the gist what I wanted to share with you, and make sure that we have at least 15 minutes for questions and answers. Thank you.
We've covered a very broad range of topics, from CSR to innovation, to entrepreneurship, technology. Let's open the stage for the audience to ask some questions or remarks for the moment, and then we wrap it up.
Well, I had a question regarding Bruce's presentation. First of all, thank you all for wonderful insights. I was wondering, you said that there will be a sort of standardized regulation so that companies get to know. And I was wondering what your opinion was about this, because I've heard, for instance, in 2014, there was a standardized regulation in India, applied that 2% of your revenue should be invested in ESG-related investments. And it actually turns out, after that implementation, a lot of companies decrease their investments to just only reach the 2% mark. So what is your opinion on, do you think it will backfire, or that will actually help the world in that sense, to actually have those standardized regulations?
Yeah, no, thank you for your question. I know you're also doing CSR, ESG research, so your question comes from an informed background. So I think that, I mean, this is kind of like almost a policy, opinion, personal opinion. But I believe if we compare the US with Europe, Europe already has a lot of, it has a EU directive, a lot of regulation on environmental, on non-financial disclosure of environmental. And the US is really way behind, and they have been taking advantage, like they're not in an equal market, right? Like, so they are free riders, they're taking advantage of that. So I think that putting everybody on the same playing field is a good idea, but here we're talking about the US and Europe, but then we have the rest of the world, right? And some of the research that we have seen in the multinational firms, that they cannot do this waste here in Europe, so then they go to the emerging markets and they dump it there, and it's very hard to track. So, but in the what's happening now, like for instance, regulation like the SEC, which is the Stock Exchange Commission in the US, I think in January 8th or something, is going to pass a stringent regulation on non-financial disclosure, and there's a lot of contestation now because that's going to be it's going to be liable, like it's going to be as trackable and as financial regulation. So if you either omit or misinform, I mean, that's like a crime. So I think that's good for US firms to be able to have to do that, right? So I think I believe it will raise the bar up, high up, and hopefully will set a good standard for the rest of the world, like from Europe. And then from the US, they're doing a lot of greenwashing. They just get this GRI or SASB, like 900 items. They pick up 30. They make a very glossy, like report, but there's really nothing in there. And that's like, I personally stopped doing a lot of CSR work for a long time because it was all like measuring the smoke, like it wasn't really measuring anything. So I think, like other things, like, affirmative action and other things, there's the positive and then the unintended consequences. Like, there are a lot of unintended consequences of good practices, like wearing helmets, right? Like this was the big one. Like, now in Spain, they require helmets in your motorcycle. What happens? There were a lot less donations, of organs. So that's like an unintended consequences. Like a lot less deaths of young people, but then other people could not live. So there are a lot of unintended consequences, and there's a lot of professions that they work around skipping regulation and calculating the risk if you break the regulation. But in general, I think that like quotas, like it's good to set it wouldn't happen if you don't set a level playing field to the degree possible. Yeah. So I don't know, like that's my opinion. I haven't really thought a lot about it, but that's kind of my, yeah, I think it's good. Yeah.
If I may, I think that a big issue in all of this is what's the driver.
Yeah.
And from the perspective of companies, organizations, the big issue is that they don't want to be on the bad side of a big media story. I have a daughter that is 11. And you should see her with ESG things. I mean, she is like the thought police. And so in many ways, I think for firms that might be, in particular, for firms that have a lot of direct contact and front contact with the public, that might be a stronger driver than actual regulation. Regulation may actually work for those. If you are a mining company or a tool and die company that supplies mining firms, and you have 12 customers around the world, it's a different issue than if you're SATA, right? If SATA only needs one incident of like a picture of a kid tied to a chair in Afghanistan sewing a thing for my daughter never to buy a shirt from them again. So that regulation, obviously, but what I'm trying to say is that regulation is to some extent trying to keep up with
it's definitely trying to keep up. It's behind,
public demand for this stuff. The big concern for firms is you get caught in one of these things, you have a problem.
So it's a risk, it's a risk measurement, but it's also a very, we're all strategy professors. It's also a very strategy thing because just look at BP, Shell, and Aramco, right? So they have a strategy on how they're going to handle ESG. So BP, like decided beyond petroleum, blah, blah. Aramco, like we're dirty, like don't annoy us. So that's like a strategic move. And Shell is in the middle and it's like, it's like differentiation strategy, right? Like you don't have a strategy, like you're in the middle and you're not pleasing anybody. So that's also like a strategic decision on how you internalize that. There is like a minimum that you have to comply with the regulation. And then it's like, do you use this as an opportunity, like to reinvent yourself, to be like, in the front of the market, or do you just, try to, you, as Julio says, you don't want to be the work, you don't want to be in the bottom, but you don't want to, and sometimes you don't want to be the first, the non, like the guy, like you don't want to be that, so it depends. It's a strategic choice. Yeah, but it's a good question.
Maybe I can jump in here. I had a really interesting conversation with the head of strategy of an Austrian bank, the biggest Austrian bank, and he said that adding to this public demand for ESG, there's also a massive demand from the investor side. He says he could issue green bonds twice a week and he would still get a lot of money, but he doesn't have a sufficient number of investments to put this money into. So if you are a company and you need money, One way to get to that money is to become an ESG
Absolutely, absolutely,
company.
yeah,
So the pressure also comes from the financing side.
yeah.
And he gave an example of a really great Austrian company, a steel company. First, some Austrians here. They are really struggling getting money locally from Austrian banks because all Austrian banks have committed to ESG through the Equator Principles. And now they have to get funding from Russian banks and from players outside of this market, which is crazy.
Yeah, no, it's a great opportunity, to be ESG as a company to get, cheaper financing but everything is almost a green bond, but it's really not regulated. So I think that's also going to be a little bit more, because the ones that they are doing and the ones that they are just greenwashing, there's like a disadvantage there, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, here I think the standardized regulation and reporting is very important because it could reduce this greenwashing issue with some of these instruments.
Yeah, to standardize, yeah. To be able to measure the metrics.
So you have issued green bonds, and then there's a big scandal, like you have this oil spill or something like that. Then are your green bonds going to be downgraded to brown bonds or something like that? Or
Possibly.
That is going to happen.
Yeah.
I don't think.
Maybe you will get disqualified.
I don't think there is any sanctions in place at the moment.
Yeah, but that's the problem, because I think the EU is trying to regulate these because it's so. I mean, I had the slide that I skipped on the green bonds. It has incredible, it's like huge. Yeah.
But even the role of the media, there's a big story last week because I think it was a TED Talk about green, et cetera, and they included the CEO of Shell. And people revolted.
Yeah.
And they went after TED Talks, and because that's exactly the same thing. You're greenwashing and and that's what a lot of companies. So obviously TED Talks, but actually BP is getting big spillover effect from that. And so that's the for companies. That's the big thing. That's they just need. They don't want to become a meme. They don't want to become a TikTok
viral, whatever. Yeah.
Viral thingy that in 2 days takes half your market value away.
So everything is very related because the TikTok, you need the digital, right? Like you need, and then you have this labor market that is like so amorphous now, but that's part of the. I mean, I think ESG should be EESG. Like now, I think that people are throwing another E, but everything is related. And then, like with your work on how do you protect that knowledge, if it's so. So I think everything is so transversal. And yeah, for me, one of the big things is also the role of the stakeholders. How they're pushing, and the stakeholders being, like Julio's daughter, like being a police, and demanding some things from companies, and it can go very quickly, it can go viral, and then but even what Tara is doing now with they have this brand, the red label. I don't know. I don't think people are buying into it. So
can I just interject, if I may? Ruth mentioned stakeholders, and that's an interesting perspective because there is research saying that stakeholders very often have dual roles. And depending on the context, they might actually have very different preferences. Let's think about ESG investing. So we just had a strike in the UK within the university system over pensions, because academics live longer and they have higher salaries, allegedly. So they need to make higher pension contributions because the fund is underperforming. And of course, there was a strike against it. But the fund managers were saying, well, listen, you want us to pursue ESG-friendly portfolio. So we don't invest in, tobacco companies. We don't invest in oil companies. Returns are much lower. And that's a pressure coming from you guys, in terms of responsible investment. So now you're on the receiving end in terms of pensions, and you're not happy about it. Make up your mind. So, I mean, I'm a bit flippant here, but that points out to a serious problem. Stakeholder pressure is A, not homogeneous. There are different groups of stakeholders, of course. And B, it seems to be contextualized. It depends on a specific context within which a particular problem is considered. So, you know, just saying that we were pursuing a responsible ESG policy, it's not enough. Responsible from whose perspective?
Yeah.
Because clearly there are different views on what is ESG compliant. So I think we have a job cut out for us, well, for us in particular, researching this field. Sorry if I am a bit rambling.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I don't know where TIA Craft invest in. Probably they invest. TIA Craft is the retirement for pensions for professors in the US. Hopefully they invest in green places, but I'm pretty sure that at the end of the day when I retire, I want to see my money. so you have these on the as a recipient, I want to see returns. As a member, I want to see good things, right? In terms
Yeah, but
of,
I think sustainable finance has to be financially sustainable.
there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a question I think maybe for Jakob. Is there kind of a risk related to this? Like, for example, you invest in those green, and then obviously there is the moral hazard risk that someone is calling it green and it's not green. There's going to be a scandal, and then maybe this is going to affect
This happens a lot with CalPERS because they were CalPERS, the pension funds in California. They were saying, oh, you know, they had like these red lists, and then the stock was going down because they were attacking these companies because they didn't have women, and then the stock is going down because they're shaming them. It's like, okay, could you take that on the side? Our stocks, you know, like, yeah, exactly. So that's the problem, right? Like that's.
Maybe from the point of view of the investor, this is a risk because it's something that you don't have under control. No? This may come up, some scandal may pop up, and then you know.
But you know, I think the Exxon #1, the engine #1 with Exxon was very interesting because they did this entire report that seems to be ESG, but it's not. I don't know if you have read the report, but the report basically says this company is in financial risk, is not in the financial interest of the shareholders. That the company doesn't have, you know, an assessment of the climate change risk, but not because we care about the weather. It is because we care about our shares. And on that, they were able to put 3 board members. So, you know, I think that was very smart that this is more fund. Yeah.
I think on the bank side, it's less about the share price. I would say it's more about the banks need access to financial markets. And if you have a scandal, then this will sort of decrease your ability to refinance. All the bank does is lending out money, but it also lends money itself. If on the one hand you have you deteriorate your lending conditions, then I think that's where the primary motivation lies.
Yeah, I think to be honest, the risk of investing in a green investor turn out not to be green is lower than actually not investing in a green investor anyways, given the fact that we have to take future generations into account, especially the stakeholders. As I think, like I see an upcoming trend now that stakeholders are becoming more and more skeptic. So greenwashing is not doable anymore. Like you can try, but it doesn't work. So I think that corporations nowadays realize that or start to realize that and actually want to intrinsically move things or change things within the company because they know that the risk of exposure is really there.
I think in that high note, I think in that high note we should close. That's a great high note for the next generation.